Welcome. I see that I have 4 people online right now. We're going to wait a minute or so until other people might get here right at 7. Just for future reference, these will be recorded every night. So if you're doing something else on some other night, you can always listen to it after the segment. But it's also, hopefully, if you like this, you can get some of your friends to sign on and follow us every night as well. So just going to wait a second. I hope you're all comfy. Hopefully you can all hear this. Because of certain settings for YouTube, especially dealing with children, it automatically disables comments. So normally there'd be a spot where you can comment and I could see it and I could say, hey, do you hear me? And you could respond by typing in a message. Because it's school related, it's education related, those comments are disabled. But if there's any issues, please, you can always email me at schmidt@victorschools.com or even reply on my YouTube channel, and I will get back to you or correct any mistakes that might be. We are now at exactly 7:01. We have 4 of you, and thank you. Thank you, whether you're followers, thank you. If you just heard about this, wanted to follow. This book, which is actually the whole Chronicles of Narnia, which however many books there are, it's all in this, was something I read to my son when he was about your age. And we read through the whole series, and I had never read it before. And we thoroughly enjoyed it. Oh, I see we have 7 people, which is great. Hopefully, you'll enjoy my reading and interpretation of this. Before we start, though, a little history on the book itself. C.S. Lewis, who was the author, wrote this after World War II in England. And England was pretty well devastated by World War II. If you've ever seen pictures of London, it was pretty horrendous. But what C.S. Lewis did during the war is a lot of parents sent their children to live with relatives or friends in the country where it was safer. And he had a country home, and he actually took 3 young girls under his roof, and to keep them occupied at night, he told them stories. And this became the beginnings of the Chronicles of Narnia. And in fact, in the story, it's about 2 boys and 2 girls, where he had 3 girls. And actually, I found online that some people said he took 4 in, and there were 2 boys and 2 girls. So whatever the story is, he did take children under his roof and told them stories. And this sort of began things. This was written before I was born, and I'm old. And so there's some words in here you might not know. So I got a list. I'm just going to read them down so you can think about those words when I read them, so they'll make more sense. Air raids. Those are attacks by aircraft on targets. Blue bottle. There's a scene where he mentions, oh, there's just a blue bottle. Well, that's a type of fly, a blue bottle fly. So that's just what was there. A looking glass. Now, if you've ever heard of Alice in Wonderland and Alice through the looking glass, a looking glass is a mirror. Mothballs. Some people still use them. Mothballs, you put them in clothing so moths don't chew at nice wool clothes. So people would put that in clothing and storage. A muffler. A muffler is not something on your car. A muffler is a scarf around your neck. Parcels are packages that you receive from someplace. The word queer, which means strange or unusual. A row is a disturbance or a quarrel. Let's not have any rows here. Um, and probably the biggest one, because we're going to be reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, is the word wardrobe. Now, in old homes, a lot of times they didn't have closets. So where do they put their clothing? They put them in dressers, but they also put them into wardrobes, which, think of a big piece of furniture that you could hang your coats and your pants and dresses and stuff in. That's a wardrobe. And it could be pretty big. The other thing is a wireless. A wireless is an old name for a radio. And back when this story was written, there were no TVs. They had movies in movie theaters, but not movies at home. So the main source of entertainment was either reading a book, doing some hobby, or telling stories, or listening to the wireless, listening to the radio. So, with no further ado, we're going to begin. Tonight, we're going to read the first chapter of this book. And so hopefully you're sitting somewhere nice and comfy. Story. Chapter 1. Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station, 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Grew over most of his face, sound familiar? And as well on his head. And they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him. And Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they said goodnight to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet, and no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Come off it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go on talking like that." "Like what?" said Susan. "And anyway, it's time you were in bed." "Trying to talk like mother," said Edmund. "And who are you to say when I'm going to go to bed? Go to bed yourself." "Hadn't we all better go to bed?" said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here." "No, there won't," said Peter. "I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes walk from here down to the dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows at Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along, and the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There'll be hawks." "Badgers," said Lucy. "Foxes," said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when the next morning came, there was a steady rain falling so thick that when you looked out of the window, you could see neither the mountains, nor the woods, nor even stream in the garden. "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in another. "Do stop grumbling, Ed," said Susan. 10 to 1, it'll clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books." "Not for me," said Peter. "I'm going to explore the house." Everyone agreed to this, and that was how the adventure began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected that they would. But soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armor, and after that was a room all hung with green, with a harp in one corner. And shortly after that, they looked into a room that was quite empty, except for one big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking glass in the door. And there was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. "Nothing there," said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the fur, and powdery and extremely cold. "This is very queer," she said, and went on a step or 2 further. Next moment, she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. "Why, it's like branches of a tree," exclaimed Lucy. And then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away, where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later, she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at nighttime, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it was a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. "I can always get back if anything goes wrong," thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow, and through the wood towards the other light. In about 10 minutes, she reached it and found it was a lamppost. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamppost in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming towards her. And soon after that, a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upwards, he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet, he had goat's hoofs. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice that at first because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face with a short pointy beard and curly hair, and out of the hair stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. In the other arm, he carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, and when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. And that is the end of chapter 1. Let me see how long chapter 2 is. If we have a little staying power, we can read chapter 2. What Lucy found there. Good evening, said Lucy, but the fawn was so busy picking up his parcels that at first he did not reply. When it had finished, it made her a little bow, good evening, said the fawn. Excuse me, I don't want to be inquisitive, but should I be right in thinking that you are a daughter of Eve? My name's Lucy, she said, not quite understanding him. But you are, forgive me, you are what they call a girl, said the fawn. Of course I'm a girl, said Lucy. You are in fact human. Of course I'm human, said Lucy, still a little puzzled. To be sure, said the fawn. How stupid of me, but I've never seen a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve before. I am delighted. That is to say, and then it stopped as if it had been going to say something it had not intended, but had remembered in time. Delighted. It went on. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mr. Tumnus. I'm very pleased to meet you, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy. And may I ask, O Lucy, daughter of Eve, said Mr. Tumnus, how you have come to Narnia? Narnia? What's that? Said Lucy. This is the land of Narnia, said the fawn, where we are now, all that lies between the lamppost and the great castle of Caraparal on the eastern sea. And you've come from the wild woods of the west. I got in through the wardrobe. In the spare room, said Lucy. Oh, said Mr. Tumnus in a rather melancholy voice. If only I had worked harder at geography when I was a little fawn, I should no doubt know all about the strange countries. It's too late now. But they aren't countries at all, said Lucy, almost laughing. It's only just back there. At least I'm not sure. It's summer there. Meanwhile, said Mr. Tumnus, it's winter in Narnia. And it has been for ever so long, and we shall both catch cold if we stand here talking in the snow. Daughter of Eve from the far land of Spare Room, where eternal summer reigns around the bright city of Wardrobe, how would it be if you came and had tea with me? Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy, but I was wondering whether I ought to be getting back. It's only just around the corner, said the fawn, and there'll be a roaring fire and toast and sardines and cake. Well, it's very kind of you, said Lucy, but I shan't be able to stay long. If you will take my arm, daughter of Eve, said Mr. Tumnus, I shall be able to hold the umbrella over both of us. That's the way. Now, off we go. And so Lucy found herself walking through the wood, arm in arm with this strange creature, as if they had at the bottom of one small valley. Mr. Tumnus turned suddenly aside as if he were going to walk straight into an unusually large rock. But at the last moment, Lucy found he was leading her into the entrance of a cave. As soon as they were inside, she found herself blinking in the light of a wood fire. Then Mr. Tumnus stooped and took a flaming piece of wood out of the fire with a neat little pair of tongs and a little lamp. Now we shan't be long, he said, and immediately put a kettle on. Lucy thought she had never been in a nicer place. It was a little, dry, clean cave of reddish stone, with a carpet on the floor and two little chairs, one for me and one for a friend, said Mr. Tumnus, and a table and a dresser and a mantelpiece over the fire, and above that a picture of an old fawn with a gray beard in one corner, and there was a door which Lucy thought must lead to Mr. Tumnus's bedroom, and on one wall was a shelf full of books. Lucy looked at these while he was setting out the tea things. They had titles like The Life and Letters of Silnus, or Nymphs and Their Ways, or Men, Monks, and Gamekeepers, A Study in Popular Legend, or Is Man a Myth? Now, daughter of Eve, said the fawn, and really it was wonderful tea. There was a nice brown egg lightly boiled for each of them, and sardines on toast, and then buttered toast, and toast with honey, and a sugar-topped cake. And when Lucy was tired of eating, the fawn began to talk. He had wonderful tales to tell of life in the forest. He told about the midnight dances and how the nymphs who lived in the wells and the dryads who lived in the trees came out to dance with the fawns. About long hunting parties after the milk-white stag who could give you wishes if you caught him. About feasting and treasure-seeking with the wild red dwarfs and deep mines and caverns far beneath the forest floor. And then, about summer when the woods were green and old Silness on a fat donkey would come to visit them, and sometimes Bacchus himself. And then the streams would run with wine instead of water, and the whole forest would give itself up for weeks on end. Now that isn't always winter now, he added gloomily. Then, to cheer himself up, he took out from its case on the dresser a strange little flute that looked as if it were made of straw and began to play. And the tune he played made Lucy want to cry and laugh and dance and go to sleep all at the same time. It must have been hours later when she shook herself and said, "Oh, Mr. Tumnus, I'm so sorry to stop you, and I do love that tune, but really I must go home. I only meant to stay for a few minutes." "It's no good now, you know," said the fawn, laying down its flute and shaking his head at her very sorrowfully. "No good," said Lucy, jumping up and feeling rather frightened. "What do you mean? I've got to go home at once. The others will be wondering what has happened to me." But a moment later she asked, "Mr. Tumnus, whatever is the matter?" For the fawn's brown eyes had filled with tears. And then the tears began trickling down its cheeks, and soon they were running off the end of his nose. And at last it covered his face with his hands and began to howl. Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy in great distress. Don't. What's the matter? Aren't you well? Dear Mr. Tumnus, do tell me what's wrong." But the fawn continued sobbing as if his heart would break. And even when Lucy went over and put her arms around him and lent him her handkerchief, he did not stop. He merely took the handkerchief and kept on using it, wringing it out with both hands whenever it got too wet to be any more use. So that presently Lucy was standing in the damp patch. "Mr. Tumnus," bawled Lucy in his ear, shaking him. "Do stop. Stop it at once. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a great big fawn like you. What on earth are you crying about?" "Oh, sobbed Mr. Tumnus. "I'm crying because I'm such a bad fawn." "I don't think you're a bad fawn at all," said Lucy. "I think you're a very good fawn. You're the nicest fawn I've ever met." "Oh, you wouldn't say that if you knew," replied Mr. Tumnus between his sobs. "No, I'm a bad fawn. I don't suppose there ever was a worse fawn since the beginning of the world." "Well, what have you done?" asked Lucy. "My old father now," said Mr. Tumnus. "That's the picture over the mantelpiece. He would never have done a thing like this." "A thing like what?" said Lucy. "Like what I've done," said the fawn. "Taken service under the White Witch. That's what I am. I'm in the pay of the White Witch." "The White Witch? Who is she?" "Why, it is she who got all Narnia under her thumb. It's she who makes it always winter and never Christmas. Think of that." "How awful," said Lucy. "But what does she pay you for?" "That's the worst of it," said Mr. Tumnus with a deep groan. "I'm a kidnapper for her. That's what I am. Look at me, daughter of Eve. Would you believe that I'm the sort of fawn to meet a poor innocent child in the wood, one that has never done me any harm, and pretend to be friendly with it, invite it home to my cave, all for the sake of lulling it asleep and then handing it over to the White Witch?" "No," said Lucy. "I'm sure you wouldn't do anything of the sort." "But I have," said the fawn. "Well," said Lucy rather slowly, for she wanted to be truthful and yet not be too hard on him. Well, that was pretty bad, but you're so sorry for it, I'm sure you'll never do it again." "Daughter of Eve, don't you understand?" said the fawn. "It isn't something I have done. I'm doing it now, this very moment." "What do you mean?" cried Lucy, turning very white. "You are the child," said Tumnus. "I had orders from the White Witch that if I ever saw a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve in the wood, I was to catch them and hand them over to her. And you are the first I have ever met. And I pretended to be your friend and asked you to tea, and all the time I've been meaning to wait till you were asleep and then go and tell her." "Oh, but you won't, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy. "You won't, will you? Indeed, you really mustn't." "And if I don't," said he, beginning to cry again, "she's sure to find out, and she'll have my tail cut off and my horns sawn off and my beard plucked out, and she'll wave her wand over my beautiful cloven hoofs and turn them into horrid solid hoofs like a horse's. And if she is extra and special angry, she'll turn me to stone. And I shall be only a statue of a faun in her horrible house until the 4 thrones at Cair Paravel are filled, and goodness knows when that'll happen, or whether it'll ever happen. I had known that humans were light before I met you. Of course, I can't give you up to the witch, not now that I know you, but we must be off at once. I'll see you back to the lamppost. I suppose you can find your own way from there back to spare room and wardrobe. I am sure I can, said Lucy. We must go as quietly as we can, said Mr. Tumnus. The whole wood is full of her spies. Even some of the trees are on her side. They both got up and left the tea things on the table, and Mr. Tumnus once more put up his umbrella and gave Lucy his arm, and they went into the same empty room from which the whole adventure had started. She shut the wardrobe door tightly behind her and looked around, panting for breath. It was still raining, and she could hear the voices of the others in the passage. I'm here, she shouted. I'm here. I've come back. I'm all right. And that's the end of chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading it to you. Tomorrow we'll read chapter 3, which is Edmund and the Wardrobe. And it just keeps getting better and better after this. I hope you enjoyed it. Please tell your friends to join us tomorrow night. I'd like to see how many people we can get to join us. We had 6 or 7 today. Maybe we can have 100 or so. So talk to your friends. Have a great evening. Say hi to your parents. And I will be doing this every night until we are back in school or summer starts. So have a great evening.